I love doing DC fast charge recordings, but this one is special. That's because I am standing in front of a Catalina Cove Rivian R2 that was just delivered to a friend of mine, Brian Yoon. Brian lives out here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So he graciously offered his vehicle for me to do charge and range testing, and I took him up on the offer without hesitating a second. Just landed a couple hours ago. We're doing a 10 to 80% charge recording now. I'm going to do a range test overnight, and then in the morning, a full 0 to 100% charge recording. But here today, we're going to focus on the 10 to 80% charge recording. Now, Rivian says the R2 can charge from 10 to 80% in a little under 30 minutes. They say 29 minutes. So we're going to see if that is true. As far as I know, to date, no one has been able to independently verify that. I haven't seen any videos or anybody posting online yet. So this may be the first neutral 10 to 80% charge recording on a Rivian R2. I'm going to plug into a Walmart 400 kilowatt charger. However, a little complicated because the R2 can actually pull a little over 600 amps. That is unusual. Most electric vehicles, even the ones that charge fast, can max out at 500 amps. Well, those are the 400 volt architecture EVs, like the R2 is. Often when the manufacturers really stress higher and faster charging speeds, what they do is they increase the voltage rather than the current, the amperage, and they give the vehicles 800 volt battery packs. Rivian chose not to do that, primarily for cost savings, but they didn't give up on decent charging speeds because what they did was they pushed the amperage to the limit, up over 600 amps. Now, there aren't many chargers that can deliver up to 600 amps. The Alpatronic chargers that Iona uses, and also the Walmart network uses the Alpatronic chargers, and also the ABB A400s that Walmart uses can deliver 600 amps out of their CCS connectors, but not out of the NACS connectors. And each one of their chargers has a CCS connector and a NACS connector. Those are limited to 375 amps. When they're the ABB A400 chargers, if you go to a Walmart charging station that has the Alpatronic chargers, both sides can still deliver up to 600 amps. Now, this hasn't been an issue because no vehicles really have been able to pull 600 amps that we can buy here in America. But now it seems to be an issue with the R2. And for me to do this charge recording, this was the only side I can go to. But I can't use the native NACS inlet, because the NACS connector is going to be throttled to 375 amps. So I have to use an adapter. I have the Electron. It's rated for 500 amps, but you can always boost over that for a certain period of time. Hopefully we won't have any issues with that. But I'll be charging from the CCS side here, and we're going to try to get a clean 10 to 80% charge recording, and then we'll do all the analyzing, the charts, the graphs, all that stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just going to be the first of a couple videos. I'm going to be putting out the 70 mile an hour range test, and then also the full 0 to 100% charge curve. When I'm done with the range test tomorrow, we'll fully charge from 0 to 100%. But to be honest with you, the 10 to 80 is the most important in my mind. Most owners don't drive their vehicle down below 10%. They're concerned about, running out. And when you're at a DC fast charger, you typically don't charge higher than 80%. So the 10 to 80 is really what's most important. And that's why I wanted to break this out and do its own video, just analyzing Rivian R2 10 to 80%. Let's get into it. And I did get a clean charge recording from 10 to 80%. And I actually sent my results off to a couple of people that are familiar with how R2 charges, and was told that this is pretty much the charging curve. Now, with that said, you're not going to always get this. There's a lot of other environmental factors that can make the vehicle charge a little bit slower. It's actually even possible for it to charge slightly faster, not much, probably a minute at the most faster from 10 to 80%, but this is the R2 charging curve. So with that said, let's jump into the 10 to 80% time-lapse recording, and then we'll take a look at my charts and graphs. Today's video is sponsored by evchargingstations.com. If you drive an electric vehicle or you're planning to, this site is packed with comprehensive charger reviews, detailed DC fast charging graphs, and the latest news from all of the fast charging networks. You'll find real-world testing, easy-to-understand comparison, and deep dives into how different electric vehicles actually charge. Before you buy an EV charger or plan your next road trip, make sure to bookmark evchargingstations.com and make smarter charging decisions. Before I start the time-lapse recording, I want to let you know that there are a couple of short periods when the R2 screen goes blank for a bit. Like all Rivians, the R2 will power down after about 10 minutes, and I had to wake it up so that the screen was displayed. I could have edited them out, but then the timer would have jumped, and I didn't want to confuse the viewers. Alright, so it takes about 38 seconds for the R2 to be charging above 200 kilowatt. And at the 1 minute point, the R2's taken in 214 kilowatt. The charging power gradually climbs up to 226 kilowatt at 31% state of charge after 6 minutes of charging. That's the point at which the R2 will begin lowering the amperage that it's calling for. Until now, the vehicle was calling for maximum amperage, which Rivian told me is 630 amps. The reason the kilowatt draw has been gradually climbing is because the battery pack's voltage increases as the state of charge goes up, and the kilowatt draw is the amperage times the battery pack voltage. That's why you saw the charging power increase from 214 kilowatt at 12% state of charge to 226 kilowatt at 31% state of charge, even though the R2 was calling for the same maximum amperage. Starting back up after 10 minutes, the R2 is at 45% state of charge. So we added 35% of the battery in 10 minutes, which should be good for nearly 100 miles of highway driving in moderate ambient temperatures. And at that point, the R2 is taking in 171 kilowatts. It reached 60% state of charge in a little over 15 minutes, and the charging rate is now down to 135 kilowatts. So we replenished half of the battery in 15 minutes, and you could see that here where it says the battery has taken in 46.9 kilowatt hour. That squares perfectly with the R2's 88 kilowatt hour battery pack, 50% of which would be 44 kilowatt hour. But there's always charging losses, and that's the roughly 3 kilowatt hour difference in the R2's 88 kilowatt hour battery pack. It takes 5 more minutes to go from 60% to 70%, and the R2 is now charging at 116 kilowatts. And about 2 minutes later, the R2's charging power drops below 100 kilowatt at 73% state of charge, and continues to drop all the way to 68 kilowatt when we reach 80% state of charge after charging for 27 minutes. So the R2 can charge from 10% to 80% in 27 minutes, which is a full 2 minutes faster than what Rivian claims. I like that when the companies underpromise and overdeliver. And from what I understand, there is room for improvement in that charging curve, and it is possible that in the future, you'll get an OTA update on your R2 that will shave some more time off of that 10 to 80% charge recording, which would be helpful because there are competitive offerings that do charge from 10% to 80% faster than the R2 can. This is not a top of class characteristic of R2, but as far as I'm concerned, it is acceptable. Okay, well, now that we've taken a look at the time-lapse recording, let's take a look at my charts. And for that, we're going to first start off with the charging curve chart or the charging power chart. And then we'll go into the time to charge chart, which really shows us how many miles per minute the R2 is charging at and how long you have to stay at the charging station to replenish driving miles. All right, so if you recall, the R2's kilowatt draw jumped up to 214 kilowatt in a minute and continued to increase for 6 minutes until it peaked at 226 kilowatts and began lowering its amperage. Then the charging power dropped off pretty quickly, but after comparing my charging session to others, I believe I had a slightly quicker drop than the exact R2 charging curve, which should look like this. And that means I missed out on a little extra power represented by this fill. But honestly, that might have cost me about 15 or 20 seconds in this charging session. That's all. So it's really not worth worrying about. But I wanted to show you that this drop could have been a little more linear. Other than that, it's a very smooth linear drop until you get to about 67% state of charge. And interestingly, the charging power increases a few kilowatt for a couple of minutes and creates this little bump here to 71% state of charge. Now that's not an anomaly. That's normal for the R2, and I've confirmed this with multiple sources. This isn't the best charging curve. There's a lot of room under the curve for improvement, and I do believe that it's not unreasonable to assume that Rivian can make slight improvements and allow the R2 to hold slightly higher charging power after the initial 6 minutes of full amperage and have it look something like this, with the vehicle finishing up drawing 100 kilowatts instead of dropping down to 70 kilowatts at 80% state of charge. A curve like this would likely shave another 2 to 3 minutes off the time and give the R2 a 10 to 80% charging time right around 25 minutes, which would be greatly appreciated by owners who need to frequently DC fast charge their vehicle. And next up, let's take a look at my time to charge charts. On these charts, you're going to see how fast the R2 can reclaim driving range, how many miles per minute are adding, how many minutes you have to charge to add a certain amount of miles. But with these charts, I actually need to give you two charts for each individual topic we're talking about. And that's because the R2 has two different wheel options. The vehicle that I borrowed to do my range test with had the 20-inch all-terrain wheel and tire package. And that one is rated at 307 miles per charge. But the same vehicle with the 21-inch all-season tires has an EPA range rating of 330 miles. So the data that I use for the 20-inch wheels won't match up with the data for the 21-inch wheels. So for each set of charts, I'm going to have to show two. I'll try to go through this quickly. It's a lot to consume, but I won't scrutinize every detail. If you're really interested in that, you could take screenshots of the charts and print them up and study it a little bit farther. But we'll be taking a look at two different charts for each topic that we're talking about here based on the wheel size. Let's check them out. We'll start out with the time to charge chart. It has the time in minutes on the x-axis and the state of charge on the y-axis. You can see here I started at 10% state of charge and finished at 80%, and it took just under 27 minutes. This chart is actually the same for both the 20-inch all-terrain tire and wheels and the 21-inch all-season tire and wheels, because it's just measuring the time to add battery state of charge. You can see here I have the charging time listed as 26.9 minutes, and that's because my timer clocked the session at 26 minutes and 51 seconds. This chart allows you to see exactly how much state of charge is added over any length of time in this charging session. I also like to show the miles per minute added because that's the most important metric, in my opinion. And I use the EPA range rating as well as the results from my 70 mile an hour highway range tests. But now I need to show two graphs, one for each wheel size. We'll start out with the 20-inch all-terrain wheels and tires, which have a combined EPA range rating of 307 miles. You can see from the lines added here that the R2 hovered around 10 miles of range added per minute of charging until it reached about 60% state of charge and the charging rate really begins to drop off. I have the range replenishing rate listed here based on two values, the 307 mile EPA range rating as well as the 264 mile results of my 70 mile an hour highway range test. I break up the charging sessions into 10-minute blocks. Since the R2 finished in less than 30 minutes, there's only two 10-minute blocks here to evaluate. In the first 10 minutes, the R2 added 10.8 miles of range per minute of charging if you use the EPA range rating as the basis. If you want to use my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test, it added 9.3 miles of range per minute. In the second 10 minutes of charging, it added 7.5 miles of EPA rated range every minute and 6.4 miles of range per minute based on my highway range test results. And now let's look at the results if the R2 has the 21-inch all-season tire and wheels. That version has a 330-mile EPA combined range rating. I haven't range tested the R2 with the all-terrain tires and wheels yet, so I only have the EPA data here. In the first 10 minutes, the R2 added 11.6 miles of range for every minute of charging, and that dropped down to 8 miles per minute in the second 10 minutes of this charging session. Next up, we'll take a look at how long it takes to add driving range. And we'll start off again with the R2 with 20-inch all-terrain tire and wheels. To add 50 miles of driving range, it takes 4.6 minutes if you're going to go according to the EPA range rating, and it took 5.3 minutes according to my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. To add 100 miles of driving range, it takes 9.2 minutes EPA and 10.9 minutes using my range test as the basis. 150 miles come in 15.1 minutes of EPA rated range and 18.7 minutes with my range test. 200 miles of driving range, according to the EPA, will come in 23.2 minutes. And since I finished up with only 264 miles of EPA range rating, it takes more than 70% of the battery to get that, so you don't get 200 miles of driving range when charging from 10 to 80% using my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test as the basis. And now let's take a look at that chart using the R2 with the 21-inch all-season tire and wheels. Again, we only have EPA figures here because I haven't range tested the R2 with the 21-inch tire and wheels. You had 50 miles of driving range in 4.3 minutes. 100 miles come in 8.5 minutes. That's not that bad. 150 miles in 13.8 minutes. And 200 miles of driving range in 20.6 minutes. And now I'm going to overlay the charging power chart and the time to charge chart because I know some people like to have them both on the same chart. You can take a screenshot of this and save it if you'd like. You can see over here on the right, the maximum charging power was 226 kilowatts. The average charging power from 10 to 80% was 150 kilowatt. The time from 10 to 80 was 26.9 minutes. And finally, let's take a look at the R2's master charging chart. This chart is set up in 10% state of charge blocks and allows you to get the full charging data from any starting and end point in 10% state of charge blocks. For instance, you can see the data for the full 10 to 80% session, from 30% to 70%, or from 50% to 60%, etc. Every block displays how long that section took in minutes, the amount of state of charge added, the estimated EPA range added, the average charging power in kilowatts, and the amount of energy added to the battery pack based on the pack's usable capacity when new. You'll also notice that the boxes are color-coded to demonstrate how fast or how slow the vehicle charged during that block. The light green boxes represent when the vehicle was charging at 80% or more of its highest charging rate during this session. The darker green boxes represent 60 to 79% of the maximum charging rate. The beige boxes are 40 to 59%, the orange boxes are 20 to 39%, and the red boxes represent the sections when the vehicle was charging at less than 20% of its maximum charging rate. You'll notice that there aren't any red boxes on this chart because this is a 10 to 80% charging session, and the red boxes usually appear after 80% when the vehicle really slows the charging rate as it tops off the pack and balances out all of the battery cells. This chart here is data for the 20-inch all-terrain wheels. And here's the chart for the R2s equipped with the 21-inch all-season tires and wheels. Now, I'm not going to go over all of the data on this chart. If you're interested, I suggest taking a screenshot and printing it, or refer to my article on this video over at evchargingstations.com and downloading it from there. All right, well, that's all I have here today on the 10 to 80% charging analysis for the Rivian R2. Pretty much what we expected, other than the fact that it did charge a little bit quicker than what Rivian promises. I'll have another video coming out in a week or two on the full 0 to 100% charging analysis. And I'm also going to have a video out in probably a little bit less than a week on adapter use with the R2, specifically with the R2. And that's because of the high amperage that the R2 can pull. I actually had an issue with the 0 to 100% charger recording with one of the CCS1 to NACS adapters that I was using during that session. One of the pins melted, and I want to explain that in a full video. In a nutshell, it's really because of the high amperage that the R2 pulls, higher than pretty much any other electric vehicle that you're going to be charging here in North America. So you have to make sure that you use the right adapter if you're going to use an adapter and charge at the full 600 amps. Now, luckily, there aren't a lot of charging stations that can provide the full 600 amps. The Alpatronic units can, that are on the Iona network, and also on some Walmart sites, and also the ABB A400s with the CCS connector like I used here, but not on the NACS side. Very few other chargers, if any out there, can deliver the full 600 amps. That would create this problem. Now, don't forget, pretty much all of these adapters out there are currently only rated for 500 amps. Now, you can typically push them higher than the rating for a short period of time, but it depends on how long that period of time is and just how robust that specific adapter was made. So I'm going to put out a video kind of explaining this and maybe giving some advice on the do's and don'ts of using an adapter with the R2. Look for that in about a week. All right, well, that's all I have here today. If this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.